left. Can you hear our children crying? They're calling from all over this land. They're glaring at today's page. Is your Australia fair? Is your Australia fair? So come on! Come rise and shine the rising. Come help us all to cause. Come join your children singing. Let's advance Australia fair. It's time to advance Australia fair. Come rise and join the rising. Come help us all to cause. Come join your children singing. Let's advance Australia fair. It's time to advance Australia fair.
So I'm filling in for Leon. Leon will be along shortly, but I'm spoiling myself because we're just about to do an interview with someone who was hugely prominent in the freedom movement, and yet literally could possibly be the nicest guy who was ever in the freedom movement, even though I think he recorded some of the most historical footage in Australian history. So rather than me rant on, let's bring in Rukshan Fernando. How are you?
Thanks for having good, mate. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for the nice introduction.
It's-
I don't
it's-
necessarily agree with all that kind of all those things about myself, but it's nice to have it said, of course.
Well, you probably know the real history of you. I only know the you I've met. Hey, Leon, how you doing?
G'day, how are you guys?
Hey, Leon, thanks for
And I-
coming, mate.
Rukshan, thanks for joining us tonight.
The first time I saw you, Rukshan, was I was there when Matt Lawson got shot, when we first saw the weapons. And that's when I saw you streaming. And I didn't know who you were, but you had an amazing setup. And that was the first time I literally saw a streamer. This was something new. You know, it was groundbreaking. You were just live streaming it. It didn't even occur to me that was possible. And then there you were, and you got pepper sprayed. I remember seeing you get pepper sprayed. I got pepper sprayed too, and seeing it. But I just want to talk about how you got to that point, and what drove you from being this wedding photographer, who I think was successful, to suddenly there you are facing police with what looked to me and a lot to us like rifles. They didn't look like, they didn't look like safe guns. They looked like rifles, held by stormtroopers, and suddenly all hell breaks loose. How did you get there? And when you were filming it, what was going through you before you got pepper sprayed?
Yeah, so my introduction to it was quite gradual in terms of being at those type of protests to capture it. Obviously, if we look back on the history of that whole time period in Melbourne with the lockdowns, businesses were shut down. And of course, the businesses they usually went after first were things where people gathered. So obviously weddings, churches, funerals, things like this were prominent in the types of lockdowns that they were doing. So they were completely off bounds. So I found myself, with a lot of spare time at home, not really focusing on my business. And I'm someone who's been, I've been doing this wedding business for, I've been thinking about 16 years now. So I was heavily deep into my business. And if none of these things came about, I would still be possibly, focused on my career path. in that world I was in, because I was, that's what I was, a professional wedding photographer, videographer, and I really wanted to excel at that and be amongst the best in Australia and around the world as well. We're working all over the world, so that was my main focus. But with everything that happened, and I'm guessing this is the same situation for many people in Australia and of course around the world, having that time lets you reflect on what you're doing. For instance, perhaps some people were taking up hobbies and doing things they never did before because of time. We're just time poor usually with our careers. And for me, the interest really that I've had throughout my entire life is in politics. And before I became a wedding photographer, all these type of things, I spent a bit of time in law school, and I've always been interested in the political world, and I've always had my opinions. I've always shared my opinions to my immediate friendship group via Facebook, things like this. So, and that page I actually had on Facebook, the Real Rukshan page, it's something that I had set up in I think 2013, but I'd never really used it. So it's just always kind of been there on and off as an idea of doing a blog. So, I made this video around, I think it was around the initial discussions that we were having with mask mandates in Victoria. And it was around just the stupidity of the messaging that we were hearing in the media, like the contradicting messages coming from government one day and the next day they changed their tune. Experts are saying a different thing. And I made that video and I put it up on my just my normal regular Facebook. And I had 500,000 views of that video. And, because my profile was public, this is my personal Facebook profile, I had all these people coming in from Victoria and around Australia, fighting on my Facebook post about masks and mask mandates. And, different people had different opinions. And I was like, oh, this is kind of getting a bit out of hand because it's on my personal Facebook page. And, people are kind of saying things about me. And this is probably not a good thing to have my personal Facebook used in this manner. So I actually ended up reactivating that page, and I called it Real Rukshan because my username on some of my social media platforms at that time was @TheRealRukshan, which is a nod to my favorite American president Donald J. Trump, who uses the real Donald Trump. So I just went with Real Rukshan, and I thought I'll post my content there. And it wasn't really around. I didn't really understand the protest movement at that time. I didn't really know. I had seen bits and pieces of it on the television, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. As a business owner, I was really paying attention to, what the government was saying and doing with these press conferences. And, people have pointed out there are videos of myself that purportedly look like I'm supporting the Daniel Andrews government. And, what people don't understand is, as a business owner, many businesses in Victoria, initially when something like this happens, and it is this great unknown, and you are a part of this, egalitarian style community in Australia, and you are a part of this, ethos of getting behind each other and supporting people during a time of difficulty. So most business owners willingly shut down their businesses based on the promises and the things that the government was saying. And many of us who supported those policies of the government initially was done in good faith. And what happens is, as sensible as we are as people, when you see governments, obviously very clearly time and time again change their things that they're saying, continue to fail businesses, because at the end of the day, we're also making sacrifices. I know that they like to diminish the sacrifices that many business owners in the state made, because they'll say, it was done to save lives. And perhaps there was a bit of truth to that. But once that becomes an issue where the politicians are in your face, taking you for fools, then you start to question, is this really, do I really believe in what they're doing? Do I really support what they're doing? And how can we, for myself especially, how can I show people that this is the frustrations that many people feel? So initially, a lot of the work that I did was around creating these comparative videos with what they said one day and what they say the next day. I'm really into artwork around memes. So I was creating a lot of video content around mocking some of the things that they were doing, which were obviously, ridiculous around these, hotel quarantine and just crazy stuff, right? You all know the stories. I don't want to get into it, but I spent a lot of time making content
actually,
like
we
that.
can we just interrupt there? While we know the stories, I'm not interested in the surface stories, but understanding why they were there, because there's never going to be a royal commission. So if anyone's going to investigate, that's why I wrote that piece about you. I'm trying to understand what we went through and where the government was changing everything every day, and this one minute, this, the other. I grew up in Australia where most people had very clear lines on what you had to do to be a good person. Like, perfect example, an ATM. There was never an ad campaign to say, stand 1.5 meters back. There was never a line on the ground. We just all agreed to this rule. And if you broke it, you turn around. No one's ever come to my shoulder while I'm at an ATM, because everyone agrees to that rule. So we like rules, and that keeps us safe, and we know where we stand. Then the government changed. Okay, to be a good person, you got to do this. No, you got to do this. No, you got to do this. So everybody, and I wonder whether it was done due to panic and incompetence by the government or whatever, or whether there is actually a purpose behind it to make sure that everybody was completely unsettled and focused exactly on what the government was saying, just to try be a good person every day. What do I have to do today?
Yeah. Well, in hindsight, now that we know some of how some of this went down, and you've seen kind of the exchanges between some of these politicians in text messages and things like this, it's very clear they had really no idea what they were doing. Even if they had some overarching, desire to keep people, in a certain mood or under stress or under panic, to make them, do what they tell the public to do, through fear. A lot of it was just a fear campaign. They really didn't know the things that they were doing would actually help the things that they were telling people. I know it's very vague what I'm saying, but that's really how vague what they were doing was. So at the end of the day, they took...
Is that because you're looking at, though, is that because we're trying to understand it from our point of view, that the government's motivations are to keep us safe, where in actual they might have had different motivations, and that's why we're all confused? I'm not, and it's not saying all the government, but Dan Andrews was a very interesting character, is the nicest way to put it. And there were things that he was doing, like, say, the perfect example, you can't take your mask off to drink. You have to drink through your mask. Now, he's not a stupid man at all. So it sounds like you're stupid, but what it is, well, what is it? You know what I mean? It's insane. I don't know if anybody actually tried to do it to be a good person, but this is what I meant. It was like everything became convoluted. And people didn't know.
It was a gradual thing, right? So you would notice that it would start off very simple, these things that they said, and then it just became ridiculous more and more as time went by. And I think they saw people conforming for the most part. They saw that most people were compliant. They saw that most people bought into the fear. And when they were making the mistakes, they saw this as an effective way of keeping control. And in Victoria's instance with Daniel Andrews, well, he was one of the worst premiers in our country when it came to his record of protecting the state. Whether you agree with what he did with lockdowns and all these kind of things, a lot of that was brought on by the fact that he made a lot of mistakes and he made a lot of errors. But instead of taking accountability, instead of holding his team accountable, what he did was punish the rest of us to help himself. And I think that's where a lot of the resentment towards someone like Daniel Andrews comes from, because deep down, as human beings, we can tell when we're being unfairly punished for someone else's mistakes. And if throughout any of that time, someone like Daniel Andrews got up there on the podium and said, look, we stuffed up, we made these mistakes, not out of the not out of any kind of evil deed that we wanted to do to you, but we just genuinely made mistakes. Well, they never did that. It was so hard for them to apologize. When he was brought in for that the commission they had around the hotel quarantine, even then he found it very difficult to apologize. He just blamed other people, and he said he doesn't recall anything. So these are people that overwhelmingly use the goodwill of the public against the public themselves to justify their own failures, really. And we paid a heavy price for it in terms of obviously our mental health, the businesses, the state that we find our actual economy in today in Victoria with all the debt that we have. A lot of that was just because of government incompetence and everything else that came as a result of that. As you know, as bad as all of that was, it wasn't really anything to do with what anyone else in Victoria did. It wasn't the people's fault. It wasn't the people who were protesting. It wasn't you know, the slow vaccine rollout, all these kind of things that they say and blame. It was literally just government incompetence in our state in Victoria, and perhaps in other parts of the country as well. People might have a similar opinion, and of course around the world people might have a similar opinion. So it's really, it's really difficult to dissect exactly, you know, what the mindset of someone like Daniel Andrews is. But yeah, I can just kind of, you know, sink it down into being around incompetence of the Labor Party and the way that they do things.
There was, when you were there though, when Matt Lawson got shot, because you're friends with Matt Lawson, so am I. And what I didn't know is Matt got shot twice. He actually got shot in the belly, turned around and got shot in the back as well. I didn't realize that till recently. But before he got shot, I mean, I was there with a sign that said, I think it said, Australia, land of the free, long as you do as you're told. And that was my first ever protest. And that sign actually protected my eyes because the pepper spray went in my mouth. But before they shot, did you believe that they were going to shoot people? This is before the shrine. This is in the street. Did you? We had the weapons there, but I took it for granted they wouldn't do that because this was Australia. So that was a moment where I saw, wow. Were you the same, or did you actually think, no, they're gonna do it?
I was kind of shocked, and people might say I'm naive for being shocked about something like that. But I'm, you know, uniquely when I think about Australia, I don't compare it to other degenerate, you know, third world tyrannies or authoritarian governments, even though we have issues here and there's been clashes between protesters and the public and some pepper spray comes out. I generally never believe that just people standing without weapons in a peaceful manner protesting would be shot by the government, even if some people say it's non-lethal weapons and it's rubber bullet, whatever. It doesn't matter. It could harm someone. I never really believed I would personally see that for that type of protest. I think, you know, obviously police have to protect themselves, and there might be instances where people might bring their own weapons and things like this. And of course, as a decent, you know, member of society, you'd want the police to protect the public in that instance. But just people protesting very peacefully, no weapons, obviously exercising their civil liberties in a country in the West like Australia, you would not think the government would turn on them with weapons. And that really opened my eyes to how the world, it really, even countries like Australia, we've kind of lost our innocence when it comes to those type of scenarios, right? It feels like a loss of innocence in a way. And
you said something profound on the live stream as well. You said that after you got pepper sprayed and shot at rubber bullets, you said that next they might use actual real bullets on the protesters.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the step, right? So that's just, I see this in, for instance, I come from Southeast Asia, and I talk about this a lot. You see this in Sri Lanka. So it starts with the normal protests against the government, and then it ends up with the rubber bullets and like the water cannons and stuff like this. But there's something that's been crossed in those countries where they do actually pull out the guns and end up shooting people. So that's kind of normalized. And to get to that stage, you have to first shoot people with rubber bullets. So the next logical step is, of course, you kill people with weapons. And this happens all around the world. There's certain things which are sacrosanct about our Western societies where people, the right to protest and these type of concepts are protected, where you know and you feel safe enough to protest, where you know the government won't kill you. But once they start shooting you with rubber bullets, well, the next step logically is to actually shoot you with a gun. And that barrier is gone then. You know, it's like another thing that's been crossed. That's probably why I said that, because I've seen it happen, and it happens a lot overseas. And it's kind of weird to see it happen in Australia, because, you know, I would always talking about our political system with people overseas, especially like my cousins in Sri Lanka, for instance. It's a point of pride that, you know, we're not like, you know, what's happening there. Like, that doesn't happen in our country. We don't do that. We can, you know, protest and we can do all these things, and the government, yes, they might not like it. It might be inconvenient for them, but they won't harm you for exercising your rights like that. But that's not necessarily the case. And it did become very much a tactic again, where, you know, I really think they lost control of the public, not in a bad way where the public's doing something bad to them. Just the mere fact that they had lost control of people, so they had to use again, amp up the fear and actually pull out weapons because they were worried that even more people will come out, because even more people around the state were actually unhappy with what was happening. So, if this many people are coming out now and it's going to be more people tomorrow and the day after, well, what can we do? We'll shoot them with these guns. This will be played on the news. This will be shown to people, and it will deter others from stepping out. So it was a tactic. It was a tactic of fear, and it's of course pathetic that our government did
Tactic
that.
that failed, though, wouldn't you say?
Overwhelmingly, I think it's backfired. Yes.
Yeah. No. So you thought that, as Leon just said, and so I was at the Shrine protest all morning, and I got shot in the morning by a rubber bullet, and I stuck around because so many young people around me were injured, and I just felt as an old man I couldn't leave these children to do what basically was my war, and that's how it felt then, some sort of spiritual war. So I stuck around until we got to the Shrine. But when you were filming at the Shrine, you'd already said that previously. You'd been pepper sprayed. You'd seen them shoot people. You knew that there was a chance that it could get worse. And yet you still turned up and did what you did. Where did you find the courage to do that? Because basically they'd pepper sprayed you to say, Rukshan, go back, edit your weddings, and just hide away until we let you out. And instead you got straight back in the trench and became a folk hero. And I'm sorry, but you are. Around Australia, people talk about you. You're a special person in so many people's lives. They Rukshan, they talk about you with reverence. Oh yeah, I saw the Rukshan footage. Oh my God, I still cry. Because, and I want to talk about what it is you captured. But first off, can you remember making the decision, should I go back and film it or not? Or was it, nah, I'm going back regardless? What was going through your mind before you went back to that protest?
Yeah, look, I'd probably have to take it back a few weeks or months before that protest for really what changed in me as a person to continue to go out there regardless of the circumstances or what might happen to me and these kind of things. I think when the police started coming to my house, I felt like that was a violation of whatever a thing that I believed in. I felt like that was some type of violation when they started going to people's homes to dissuade them from turning up to exercise their civil liberties in the West, to protest, and of course attacking the free press, attacking independent journalists, attacking citizen journalists, attacking the media essentially. And that's kind of when something triggered in my mind that I would have to continue to now turn up, because what they're doing is not right, and the only way that you can stop them from doing this is actually not to back down and be scared of them, but to actually turn up and let them arrest you, let them do whatever they want to do, but deep down that you're in the right. And I think that's really what that's what changes the game a lot of the time, when you stand up for yourself. And I'm if I look back now, I'm happy that I continued to go back out there, because I did receive a lot of advice from different people saying, stop Rukshan. And you have to understand, from families and from friends and other people looking, they don't really see it the way that I'm seeing it. They're not interacting with the people on the street that I'm interacting with. They're not seeing it from that eye. They're seeing it from this kind of more media perspective, or the social media comments about, you're putting people at risk, you're killing this person, you're killing granny, all these kind of things, right? So that's where people are coming from. So that really is what it changed it for me when they came to my house, and I was like, nah, this is not okay. And if I stop here now, that means they really they are the ones, they don't hold the same power that they think they do. Like the police I see the press is almost equal to the police. So if the police are allowed to be there, the press should be there. That's how it works. There are only very a small amount of circumstances where the police should just be somewhere by themselves against the public. If they're doing a SWAT or something on a house or something, the media and the public might not be there. But in a public space where members of the public are protesting, then the press should be there if the police are allowed to be there. That's how it works. At that particular point in time, the press and the police are equal. And if they try to come and, say that, no, we can tell you where you can be and where you can't be and what protest you can cover and what you can do, I don't think it goes with our actual foundational values. in a country like Australia, and the things that a lot of people have fought for. And the Shrine, remarkably, that being at the Shrine, I know people have different views about protesting at the Shrine and things, but I remember, I don't know if I talked about it during my coverage of the Shrine, but you see these monuments, and you see on the monuments, it's got these different places that men from Australia have gone to fight for. And it's got their names, and it's these distant lands in the Middle East and parts of Asia, and of course in Europe. And you have all these names, and you wonder, what do these people actually fight for? And really, at the end of the day, when you distill it down to the very simple essence of the things that people died for, it is to preserve the rights of, the freedom to associate, to live in our free societies, to be at the Shrine, for instance, if you're running away from a tyranny and you're being, hounded by the police. Like, these are the things that these people actually fought for. So it is poignant to be in a place like that, and it kind of all circles back to our history, to our future, to the present, and it's all interconnected in a way. So I draw strength from all of that, but of course, deep down within myself, the mere fact of kind of defending, my profession, and I know a lot of people ridicule citizen journalists and independent journalists, but by far, it is the most important type of journalism.
Absolutely.
In a situation like that. And that's what a lot of people in the West maybe don't understand. We celebrate, it's a shame. Our governments and our media here celebrate when they see, people in Egypt or some other country, when the government's cracking down on them, when they're pulling out their phones and documenting things. They're like, oh, this is amazing. This is what the press is about. This is the freedom of the press. But as soon as the citizens in these countries start doing it, they ridicule it. So you have to fight back against that. You have to stand your ground. And I think a lot of that comes back to my feelings around protecting those type of institutions and values that are really sacrosanct and should not be, seen as lower than the police or the government.
Do you know what? I was a witness there that day. I just want to show you something, because that day I saw the death of mainstream media. And then when I got home, because I was getting arrested while the shooting was happening. When I got home and saw your footage, I saw the birth of citizen journalism. And I'll show you what I do. So I took this photo here of these guys. They were in the streets of Melbourne, and I was shot by one of them. But I came across a Channel 7 or Channel 9 news reporter that were doing a live, and she had a mask on, and the cameraman was that vehicle was just there shooting people, and I begged them to film it. I said, look, it's there. They're just shooting people. And they just wouldn't do it. She was just trembling, and he was crying. He had tears on his face. And they went back that night and they called us Nazis and all manner of stuff. But the thing was, when you looked at it, if there was 1% real journalist in their souls, they would have gone, screw my job. That's a historical shot. An armoured vehicle on King Street in Australia, shooting Australians who are running away from it, thinking, where are we? Because this can't happen in Australia, but it was happening in Australia. And that image I've sent to media everywhere, because it's worthy of being published and talked about, but no one will publicize it. And I think it's because they know that the identity of what most Australians think Australia is, that can't fit anywhere. It's like a jigsaw piece from another jigsaw. And then later that day, you're at the Shrine and you capture something even more terrifying, but you stand there and you do it. And so you actually forget journalists like I'm a journalist because I went to uni. I think a journalist is born with the courage to see history and stand there and record it in some way or another, regardless of what might happen to you. So I actually think you captured, it was true journalism, but the courage to stand there while they're firing, knowing at one point, because if you study the footage, they are enjoying themselves. They're going ding, boom, they're having a ball, and they could have just come around and shot you, and you stood there. So I want to commend you for that. I mean, I'm in awe of the amount of courage that took, and to still do it. And there's a lot of people in Melbourne that still haven't seen that footage because the algorithms don't stay it. But I've been around Australia, and I still will have people, men and women, but especially men will tear up when you bring up that they don't have to see it, but they go, yeah, like the Mount Isa men. We're sitting there in our farm in Mount Isa, and it's really rough territory, and they're crying because what they're watching is what I want to talk about. So you were there at a moment in history. You had the courage to capture that history, and you've sort of embossed it. I don't know if that's the word. Engraved it into the souls of Australians everywhere, including people overseas. But so I can't commend you enough for what you did that day. But when you were filming it, when you were actually watching it, did you think this is history? Or did you think, what am I doing? Did you think maybe they'll do me next? What was going through your mind as you were watching it, and you still were able to hold the camera steady? That's remarkable.
Yes. So honestly, during all the filming that I did during that time, I didn't really understand in terms of the impact that it was having. I didn't really understand it because it just kind of happened, and you're just going, and you're living that life. And some of the things that you're there for, you're kind of, of course you're there as a journalist or, live streamer covering what's happening, but you're also impacted by the decisions that are made and what happens at those protests and so on. So it's a very kind of hard thing to explain when it's so kind of a part of your existence and you're just there in the moment doing what you're doing. Obviously, my core thinking is around getting, going back to the fact that I'm a photographer that captures weddings and those kind of moments. I'm hyper focused on being behind the camera, and people are watching the live stream from my phone, but I'm also filming with another, like a more professional camera as well. So I'm hyper focused on actually trying to capture the essence of whatever I'm seeing. So that just goes back to the fact that at a wedding, you're always capturing moments, people sharing, the first time that they do a first dance, or when dad walks the bride down the aisle, like the special moments that you capture, and you understand there's certain ways to capture that and show that emotion. So a lot of my training in that world comes into effect when I'm filming and capturing live stream. So I really want to tell the story of what's happening as best as I can, and so I point my camera in those directions. And often I'm not thinking about what's happening to me or if I'll get shot or things like this. I just want to get the shot. And I think, of course, that's a part of just typical photojournalism, war photographers, things like this. They all kind of have that same knack of just being behind the camera in the moment, capturing things as they happen. And it's just in you, I think, in a way. So there wasn't anything special that I kind of thought at the moment. I'm here, this is historic or anything. Nothing like that. I didn't really understand it in that sense. Of course, after a period of time and reflecting and speaking to people, years after, and hearing people's different stories, yes, that I can go back and think about perhaps the way that I did do the things that I did during the live stream coverage. And there were certain things that I did and I understood that I was doing that I didn't really pay attention to, that I do understand today. But at the moment itself, no, there was nothing like that going through my mind.
A couple of people in the comment section have called you, both of you, historians and observers of history rather than journalists. I think journalist is just a polite way or a euphemism to refer to someone that's been indoctrinated, that's a corporate government apparatchik and shill. That's what it is.
Well, I mean, journalism has been captured by the, I would say the government, the elites, the corporate world. Traditionally, it's just someone who would journal something and report back about what's happening. Of course, there's ways to do journalism, and of course, there's specialties and things like this. But in that world, someone who's documenting a protest or documenting something that's happening on the street, well, that's a very specific type of skill, and perhaps that's why you're getting these other media organizations who are sending their journalists who would typically be used to covering something pretty mundane and going to a protest. Well, they're not taking it in the same approach. Well, when you're at a protest, the important thing really is about why the people are there, who the people are, what they're saying, what the grievances are, what the police interactions is, what they're saying. I mean, those are the things that you should be focusing on. So like you said before, Michael, like they didn't want to point their camera at, people being shot or whatever by the cops and things like this. It's all a part of that. The trained journalists, or they come with instructions on how to act and behave. Whereas a street journalist, a citizen journalist, we don't necessarily have those filters and those things, stopping us from just pointing our camera and just capturing life as it happens, good or bad. You know, the outcome of that, what it means for the rest of the society, I didn't really care about in that way. It's just like, this is what it is. This is raw. This is what's happening in your state. Take it for what it is and make of it what you will. People will have different reactions, but this is the reality on the ground. And it's just that, you know, there's no need to sugarcoat it. There's no need to try to, you know, show it as something else, what it's not. You just show it as it is. And then people will obviously have disagreements. They'll be angered by it. They'll be emotional by it. Some people will dismiss it and, you know, say these people shouldn't be at the shrine. They should have been shot and so on. That's society. But underlying all of that, the role really of any kind of legitimate journalist who's covering something like that should just be to show it as much as possible, you know, in raw as it happens and how it is.
Well, that's what I just want to talk about, because since then there's been so much happening. It's like we're surfing this tidal wave of history, or the tsunami of history, and we're on the front foot and trying to keep up with it and reacting. But this is why I started thinking, well, MSN and the government, they don't want to go back, and people will say, let's move on, and that's where I thought. I've been thinking about the shrine a lot, not just because I was there, but your footage, and that's why I decided to write this piece. And it was really well received, and was called "What Rukshan Actually Captured." And this one I wanted to talk about. There's other things to talk about as well, but I personally believe that what you captured that day was basically the end of one story and the attempt to begin another. And so the people on the shrine were emissaries from the old Australia of who we thought we were. We thought we had the right to protest. We're singing the national anthem with gusto. We're not being violent. We are there because the government wouldn't listen to us. We were losing our jobs. MSN wouldn't listen to us. We had nowhere else to go but to the streets to protest. And we were kettled there. If you were on the street that day, every time you went anywhere, the police were blocking the streets. The only way open was the shrine, and then on the other side are these stormtroopers. I mean, they were police, but they were dressed like stormtroopers. They're black up here to their eyes, shields, weapons that most people had never seen before. They were telling us all day we didn't move, they were going to shoot us, and even though they had shot us a week or so before, we still sort of I didn't think they'd shoot us on the shrine. I just didn't think. I thought that was a step too far, which I was wrong. But that's what I think was the end of the Australian identity, or a moment you captured. Okay, the Australia we thought we lived in is over, and they're trying to establish a new one. But at the moment, the last 4 years, because there's been pushback, we don't really know who we are anymore. We're sort of holding on to Crocodile Dundee myths, but we're not that. And so to me, I think now the job of what we're doing, you're doing and everyone else, is almost a search for who actually are we as a country, and who do we want to be, because we have to leave some sort of identity for our children, because an identity, you can build a life on an identity of who we think we are. You know what I mean? And I've been interviewing a lot of young people, and they go, we've got no culture. This is a lot of young people saying this. We're just a load of people here doing stuff. There's no culture. There's no anything. So that's what the young people think. So what are your thoughts? You think, am I being too poetic or sentimental by what I saw, or what are your thoughts on what you actually captured?
No, I mean, there's something to be said about what you said. So the way that I see it is, Australia has a very rich history, but it's a very short history. And as a nation, this is my perspective. The tests that we have had as a nation has usually involved overseas conflict, and I know that we have a great historical link to the British, and that is a part of our inherited history. And there's a lot of connections there that can never be denied. But the history that this nation has, it's a history of conflict, and those kind of things are very much based overseas. And the people in this country, even though we've gone through political struggles and tests like this and all these type of things, I don't think there's been again, people might correct me, but there's been a defining moment where the Australian character has been tested in a way. And for instance, the US, they have their civil war, and that really is the birth of that nation's identity. And many other countries around the world have had civil wars and things like this. I'm not advocating for a civil war or anything like this, but I'm saying those kind of times in history generally builds the character of a nation and an identity, and a shared identity as well. And because of Australia's history, that shared history with the British, that a lot of people identify with, but then you have these mass waves of different types of immigrants coming throughout different generations, and again, that shared history that kind of defines who we are as Australians in the moment, in the country, it means different things to different people. And that's why it's so easy to either ignore it. That's why it's so easy to perhaps destroy it for those that want to destroy it. And that's why it's really hard for those of us who actually want to nurture and build on an Australian identity as something that is very foundational to who we are as a people. That's why we might find it so hard to do that. And, it is constantly under attack. And perhaps what happened at the shrine, like you said, during that time, for many people who identify with a certain view of Australia and understand those things, yes, maybe it was a wake-up call, like the old Australia that I truly believed in and knew is not the same anymore. But for many others watching from home who have not ever had that understanding of the history of this country, the sanctity of somewhere like the shrine, the history of what people in this country have actually fought for, they might have looked at it and been like, oh, these anti-vaxxers protesting, whatever. They might not understand it in that way. So I think some people took it the way that you're saying, as a massive shift and a change, whereas most people might have just looked at it and been like, well, I don't really relate to any of these things, even though I'm suffering through all of these things that are happening right now. And it is a problem, definitely. It's a topic that we discuss a lot now, Australian identity and who we are as people, and especially for young people. It's very hard for young people to kind of put a finger on what it means to be an Australian. And people, of course, have very strong views as well about, I'm finding this out personally myself when I talk about Australia. People have very strong views, even for myself, having certain views about Australia. So
can you explain more about that? What you just said?
Oh, look, I mean, there is a thought that Australia means British or white Australian, and that people who are outside of that might never can never be Australian. It is a growing cohort of people that maybe think that as well, and they feel disenfranchised. They feel under threat. They feel like they're losing their identity, their unique identity. And there are aspects of that I definitely agree with. Just as someone who's really honest about the world that we live in, there are definitely aspects of that which are true. But we have to also come to terms with, how we move forward in a modern Australia in the present time. And, you have to work within realities. And one of those really important facets of doing that is, if you alienate everyone else around you and just say, we're the only Australians, well, what you're going to have is a growing population of people who are not white, who are not, native to Australia in the British sense, who are going down another path. And I believe that is actually more destructive and more dangerous for the country, because then you really, race to the bottom of, defining Australian identity, because you lose out a lot of things. And what I worry about the most is, I don't want Australian history to be a piece in the museum where we, look back on history as like this, it's like a museum piece, and more likely than not, the way that we're going right now, the curators of that museum will be people that look like me, or, or Chinese and things like this, the way that things are going. Because even the younger westernized, Aussie kids, white kids, 5th, 6th generation Australian kids, I'm talking about the younger generations, they're growing up told that they should hate the country. And they're growing up told that the country is evil. And, I've touched on these topics a lot in the recent days, obviously with this immigration thing that's going on. And again, I think that's completely dangerous, because you are creating the perfect recipe. And again, this is because Australia's history is so short. It's so little. It's 200 years. And I know people think that's a
Mm.
lot of time and they hark back to other things, but it's so easy for people outside of that to take advantage of that and invent an Australia that, you know, forgoes all of that history and that identity. And we've seen them try it. We've seen them with the voice to parliament and other different things that I believe are these mechanisms of destroying this culture and history and identity. And we see it every year in Australia Day. They try this. And it is a very persistent force. It's a growing force. And they are, you know, they're given power by what's happening in the rest of the world as well. This is a common theme that we're seeing around the world. And it's advantageous for a lot of these people to have a country that has no identity, because if a country doesn't have an identity, if it doesn't have a backbone, if it doesn't have a shared belief system or a shared values or a foundational core, then the next time you have an incident where the government locks you down, you'll have less people turning up to protest. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that's right. They won't fight
they
for
get
it.
rid of
What
that.
do you fight for? You know?
What are you fighting for? Who is your neighbor? Who are they? What do they mean to you? What's your shared values? What's your shared history? The more you can remove that from a society, the easier it is to control the people. And unfortunately, the West has fallen into this trap where they believe that what they've achieved so far, which has been fantastic and great and amazing, will somehow protect them from that. And it doesn't, because all other societies who are going through this at the moment, great ancient civilizations and societies, have been put to the test on this exact same issue, and they've led to disaster for them fighting back against it, because the forces that want to do this to you are very powerful, and they usually get their way. And you can only resist with a strong foundational core. And Americans, I think, do it the best for a country like us, and that is because of their foundational documents. They very strongly protect those things. And we don't even have that. It's very hard for us, like, you know, watching what's happening in Canberra, for instance, and people are like in disbelief with the legislations that are being put through. But we don't have foundational protections of our identity. It doesn't exist.
And we thought
just to add to what you said, with identity, they've attacked our identity so much that the younger generation can't even define what gender they are. That's where we're at the moment.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, that is
what's interesting
that's a
there.
problem.
I never watch TV, but I was at a pub the other night, and someone was on Channel 7. I don't know who he is. He must be the Victorian guy. He looked about 90 years old with black hair, so I don't know if you know him. And he was going, and this was the tone that he was saying it about Australia Day. He was going, for some reason, the young people want to celebrate it. What's going on there? And I thought, I can't believe you just said that with that tone. And the person he was interviewing was also like suggesting that there was something wrong with the young people. I'm thinking, it's their country. They're celebrating Australia Day. It's their country. And it's just constant like that. It's quite extraordinary, you know, because the other thing too, just something else about the shrine. There was a channel, one of the news reporters, I think his name was Paul. He used to wear grey suits and a bald head. At the CMFU, he got covered in pizza, which sort of enhanced his image. And he was there, and he broke the story of us urinating on the shrine. And I was going through Sydney Road, and I saw him doing a story on some fire. So I thought I'd go up and ask him, you know, about the pissing on the shrine, because I was there, I didn't see it. And I said to him, you know, the policemen all had cameras, they didn't see it. Rukshan was there filming everything, he didn't capture it. There was all these professional photographers there who realized this was history. And if anyone took out their thing and started urinating on the shrine, they would have captured that, because that would have been a $100,000 Getty image. They didn't capture it. We all had cameras. We didn't capture it. So I said, so did you actually see it? And he went, no. I said, so what makes you think it happened? And he goes, oh, the CEO of the RSL said he caught it on CTV. And I said, well, did you see the CTV footage? He said, no. And I said, it's never been released. I go, so you that day, you had a story to go with, which was something you didn't see, which was going to make us look horrendous. I said, but why didn't you cover the shooting? He goes, I didn't see it. I said, you didn't see the shooting because, you know, how could you not have seen the shooting? I mean, there was people running everywhere. It's not just your image. Joel Gilmore actually has brilliant footage too, where he's running and
Yeah.
terrified. You know, the both of your footages together is daunting, and he didn't. And so this is another journalist, a paid journalist, a qualified journalist, going, "That's history, but my bosses won't like it, so I'm going to basically go with this thing that I have no evidence of and ignore what I'm seeing." And what he gave to the Australian public was a way to hold on to their old identity. How could the police shoot protesters? It's not possible in the Australia we knew. Oh, they were urinating on the shrine. Okay, that's a pass. If they're urinating, then yes, you can shoot them and we can still hold on to who we were. Well, in actual fact, that's not the case, and it's gone. Unless, of course, you captured it and you decided to edit it out. Did you do that?
I didn't capture anything like that. And of course, you know, we never saw evidence of the urination on the shrine. And if they had the CCTV, like that guy said he did, I can't remember his name. He's a bit of an interesting character as well, the guy from the shrine. You know, they would have released it. Of course, they would have released that footage. That would have been playing on the news that night. Why not?
Yep.
Of course, they would have.
We'd still be playing it.
Yeah, would still be playing it, and all they have is, like, I saw some comment about Chinese whispers. It does feel like that. It's like, oh, this happened, and they just spread that story to discredit what happened there, and they covered this. They covered up what actually happened. So, you know, the media, going back to them, this, you know, they don't even state media. I'm about to call them state media, but they were acting as an instrument of the state. Unfortunately, just as the police were, they weren't acting in the public interest as they're meant to. They were acting in the interest of the state. And the media did the same thing. And for whatever cowardly reason, they took the easy way out when it was so much, it made so much more sense for them as a media, because they do it today. They will question politicians and they'll, you know, write bad stories about politicians, and, you know, they act like they're fearless, and they'll put up these commercials about how we're always telling the truth and how we're fearless and, you know, courageous. We're on the scene. We're showing you exactly what happens if you watch any of these ads for Channel 7, Channel 9 for the news. But it's not true. When actually it mattered the most, the public in the state of Victoria and around Australia, they decided to side with the government because that was easier for them, to ignore everything else that was happening and act as these kind of purveyors of the truth, to protect the public, to push the health message. And this can be, of course, discussed around even the fact that experts were silent. Let's just forget about the protests. Like, we know how much the media silenced even just dissenting views on what was happening to the society. So, you know, they did it on purpose. There's no other way to reconcile what happened during that time, but besides saying that they knew exactly what they were doing. And that particular journalist you're talking about, he's not a dumb guy. He's a smart guy. He's good at his job. Any other topic you give him, he'll cover it, you know, quite decently. But for whatever reason, even for someone like that, which, you know, if that was me, I'd have a hard time living with myself knowing that I did that during that time.
The last thing he said to me before he walked off was, "I sleep at night."
I don't believe it.
And then he walked off, and I thought, "No, you don't."
He said that's telling that it's telling that he said that to you, because that's in his mind. It troubles him. Yeah. And a lot of these journalists from that time, they try to rewrite history, and you've seen some of them very dramatically in America, like I think Andrew Cuomo or whatever from CNN. They've kind of switched sides and they're rewriting their own history as well. And it's so obvious. It's Zuckerberg. Well, Zuckerberg is a prime example. Let's not go there. But when you see it, it's so obvious what they're doing, because they must feel ashamed of what they were. Because today, even at the time, many of us knew what was wrong, right and wrong. But today, it's almost hard to deny. With whatever they want to say or do, they can't deny the stupidity of the things that they supported very blatantly. And this is not saying that, you know, journalists are required to take the side of protesters. That's not what I'm saying. They're not required to do any of that. But the very basics they should be able to do is saying, like, this is the two sides. Okay, they said they urinated on the shrine. We asked them for evidence. They haven't given us any evidence, but we did see them shoot the protesters. Like, that's it. You don't need them to take the side of the protester. That's it. That's all you need them to do. So they weren't even willing to do that.
Yeah. The instant going back to the White Australia thing you saw, because I knew people were saying, "Oh, why there's only white people at the marches?" But I was at the marches all the time, and and photographing. And I was photographing, interviewing lots of people from different countries. There was people there from Taiwan. There was people there from China. They took the greatest risk because China, if the Chinese found out or they did an interview, their relatives in China could suffer with the social credit score system. They told me that. I was capturing Indians. I have a beautiful shot from the CMFEU march of this black Australian, he's from African Australian, and he's got the mask on, and his eyes look like, it looks like he's heartbroken, like he's come here and now he's facing the same bullshit that he finally left. I interviewed a Sudanese man recently. He came from Sudan. He told me this extraordinary story. He said he actually went to a refugee camp to get an education in Sudan because he wasn't going to get one any other way. From there, he managed to come to Australia, and now he was working for the government, and he was told in a memo that if he said anything about Israel or Palestine, even brought it up in a conversation, anything at all, he'd be immediately sacked. So he's dealing that he's come here for a country that he thought was free, and he's basically told, shut up, your opinion, you've got to keep your opinion to yourself. And he was too scared to do an interview because he doesn't want to get sacked. So I think this hunger for liberty, it has nothing to do with race. It has something to do with courage. And the people at the march, at the Melbourne March, especially early on when it was not allowed, these were the courageous. They were the grandmothers of this. You couldn't pick them. They didn't look like an army. They looked like they were on the way to the cricket or coming back from the bingo. And yet they were the basically front line for liberty in Australia. It was an extraordinary time. And I never saw any violence from the protesters. Maybe you did, but I never saw any. I saw people holding up religious albums, religious symbols. I heard people saying Hail Mary over a megaphone. I never thought I'd see that in Australia. And no one batting an eyelid. I saw a young man holding a crucifix up to policemen's faces. He was just going line after line after line. And I wrote about him. And when I interviewed him to say, hey, I wrote this piece of you called Rise of the Spiritual Warrior, the Australian Spiritual Warrior. I said, what religion are you? He said, I'm an atheist. I'm like, what? He said, I was an atheist. But when this happened, I could see it was a battle between good and evil. And I chose good. So he used that as a symbol of good. So did you feel that that's what you were in, some sort of spiritual war? Or did you feel like this was just corporations taking over or just fear? What was your thoughts of what was going on at that time?
Yeah, I think a little bit later on, not initially, but as it went on further, I don't know if I thought a spiritual component per se, but I thought it was an important moment for people. And you talk about the diversity of the people that were there. Yes, obviously, white Australians were overrepresented, as far as I can, honestly say in terms of what I saw. But there were a lot of diverse groups there, and there is a stigmatism attached within certain communities about turning up and making their communities look bad as well. Like people don't understand the way that these kind of communities are set up as well. Like I remember I was getting flack from like the Sri Lankan community, and I have no involvement with the Sri Lankan community, but they were like, oh, this Sri Lankan guy is making us look bad in Australia. He's like the guy that's going around causing all this havoc. Like that's not who we are. We're compliant. We're listening to the government. You know what I mean? Like there's always this overarching thing within all types of communities, because the Labor government's very kind of strong within multicultural communities. So there is a fear of being ostracized within your own community. So if you're wondering why there might be a lack of overwhelmingly people of diverse backgrounds there, a lot of it has to do with that, and that also comes down to this this desire that many of us would like to see a shared Australian identity and values, because that defeats those kind of problems. That's what I believe, and the people that are coming, I think, deep down, are people who truly care about, obviously, their freedoms, their rights, but also the country of Australia. And when you're there, you don't see color, you don't see race, you don't see these things. We're talking about it now, but when you're there at that moment, you're all one. And
we didn't have a tick off. One Sri Lankan. with two
No,
shining.
it's like no, it's like you're in this space. It's a very small number of people, even though it
Yeah.
might look like large crowds and stuff. Certain protests, and you all have this kind of shared uh, desire to be there for something that unites everyone. And we can kind of understand this today when we've seen the fragmentation of, the so-called freedom community. Like if we describe it in that way, you can see that fragmentation today when it comes to other issues. But at that moment, when something that was very sacred to a lot of people, and you might say it's spiritual in a way, was tested, everyone came together. Even in small numbers, they came together, and there was none of those kind of divisional lines that separated people. We all knew, everyone had their roles. Everyone knew what they were there for. Obviously, I was there doing journalism. Other people were there, leading protests, and other people were there, like you said, with the cross, going around praying and things like this. So, but it was all for this shared desire to express ourselves and say no in some way or another, or to say that actually we have a right to be here. And that is really the essence and the identity of a people or a nation. Those are the things that build that character, and that's where it really exists in moments like this. So I felt it was very I think on steps of Parliament, I remember they were singing the national anthem, or they had that bloke with the violin, and people were singing "I Am Australian" or something like this. And
did you you filmed the violin thing? Because that was me.
You're in that, Michael.
Yeah,
I remember
I
watching
set it
that.
up. I met the guy.
Yeah.
And what I loved about that, I'm not bragging that I set it up, but what I loved about that is he met me at the St. Kilda protest, which was where you filmed Damien challenging the police, where they arrested that guy, and they actually let the guy go because Damien was sitting there basically berating them. And then when we were leaving, this sort of diminutive man came up, and he didn't know. Well, not that I was anybody, but we were just talking. And then he said, I really want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And I said, what do you do? He goes, I play the violin. What I didn't know was he was one of Australia's best violinists. I mean, he was supposed to be touring the world, and he couldn't because he wouldn't take the jab. But he was one of the best violinists in Australia. And I didn't know that. And I just said, hey, well, why don't you play the Australian anthem? But I'll get on stage. I'm speaking. I'll get everyone not to talk. And if you could play it like it's happening in a camp, and it's got a broken heart, that could make a great moment. Because that's what I was from. I was from the theatre. I was a producer, Rukshan. So anyway, I didn't think I'd ever hear back. Most of my ideas, 10 of them go out. Maybe 2 come back. Anyway, half an hour later, he sends me this little piece on the phone. He goes, it really works. And I played this piece, and I'm in tears going, oh my Lord, if I can get everyone to shut up, this is going to be extraordinary. And it was to show the power of one person. This little person who thought he had no power actually did a moment in history almost as important as the shooting, but in a different way. He reminded us who we were, and that we were suffering, but we were still Australians. And he did it with 1 minute 45 seconds with the Australian anthem that most of us thought was boring. It was the first time we actually heard it as this beautiful piece of music. So this is where the history was, this battle between good and evil or stuff. So it was a really interesting time that way. I just want to bring your attention to another Sri Lankan who doesn't get any accolades. I've interviewed him about 3 times. His name's Ed, and he's about 6 foot tall, and he works on the building sites, which he lost his job for a while. But I met him now, so he works on the building site all week, and the weekends he helps with the Forest of the Fallen, whatever they're doing. And then after work, he's got a car full of pamphlets like Exit the Who or anything else. And whatever suburb he's in, he won't go home until he's done 1,000 homes, and he just goes by himself doing these things. And that's what I'm saying. There's these that's what I'm trying to capture in my interviews. There are these unsung giants who are, he's probably getting cultural attacks as well from the Sri Lankan community. What are you doing? And, you're going on the Cafe Lockdown, getting interviewed, you're making us look bad. And then But he really believes in what he's doing. He saw Sri Lanka with the conflicts, and he said, "You have to fight. You have to fight."
Yes.
And so this is what I've seen. And so to me, I think we'll actually have a moment here that could be a renaissance for Australia, based on what you said, Rukshan. It's not the Civil War where we go out and shoot each other and kill each other for 4 or 5 years, and then whoever's left makes friends. We're actually fighting for who we are, and there's a group of Australians that have not bent. They're holding their ground, and that means that these are people you can build a new culture upon. You know, then they're willing to talk. They're willing to chat, even though they don't get any chance to. You know, they're not allowed on Q&A. They're not allowed anywhere here.
Yeah.
But they actually are willing to talk, because what they want is to not leave this to their next generation or the generation after it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They're quite remarkable people, and they've done it organically. They just rose up. Like yourself, you're a perfect example of it. The government couldn't have said, "Okay, we're going to go down, we're going to go weapons. Is there anyone we have to be worried about?" "Oh, yeah, we got this Sri Lankan wedding photographer. You know, I'd keep an eye on him. No, he shot my cousin's wedding. No, he's great. He'll shut up. He doesn't do anything, you know." But in actual fact, you became. I remember watching you being interviewed on American TV, and I thought, wow, here's a man who was concerned, went down, slings and arrows faced, and he thought, no, I'm going to do what I believe in. And suddenly here you are on American TV, and you were at that moment probably the most prominent live streaming journalist in the world. And this is the truth. It's a revolution of what you were doing. Now you go somewhere, everybody's live streaming. You know what I mean? But then it was rare, and it was redefining journalism, because it's unfiltered. It's what you see is what you get. You make sense of it. You know? What was that like, being on American TV, and suddenly the man who is behind the camera, suddenly everyone's placing him in front of the camera? What was that like?
Yeah, there was a bit of pressure that came with those type of things. So obviously, when you get those requests to show up on the media, you say yes. Again, not for any type of personal gain, but I feel like it's a moment that you get that chance to represent things which are happening in your country at that moment, and the world wants to hear about it, and maybe it'll make a difference if the world hears about what's happening in Australia in that platform. Like, that's the way I'm thinking about it. It didn't really do anything, personally for me, for instance. Like, I didn't gain anything from doing that. But that morning that I did the Fox News interview was actually the morning of the Shrine protest day. So I was on Fox News, and that finished around 11 something or 12 midday, and I walked and got dropped off near the protest and joined the rest of the protest. So it was all a part of that same time period. It's all kind of surreal. You're on Fox News, you're doing this interview, then you're kind of again there capturing what's happening at the Shrine,
shooting the death of Australia.
Yeah, so that was the world that I was kind of engrossed in. So when you're doing an interview like that, you think you have to prepare and do all these things, but actually I've found over time that when you're doing interviews, when you're just telling things as they happen and you're the person documenting it, well, it's very easy to do the interview.
Yeah, that's right.
You're not thinking of other things. You're just recounting what you saw and what you're filming and what you're doing. So it wasn't difficult in that sense. And
what
now,
an incredible day, though.
There was
Fox News in the morning, capturing Australia dying in the afternoon. What did you do in the evening?
No, I was going to say there's an earthquake in the morning in Melbourne. I don't know if you remember. There was an earthquake. I was in the building in my studio in North Melbourne, so there was like an earthquake. The building shook. Then I did the Fox News interview, and then I went to the Shrine and I saw all that crazy stuff happening at the Shrine. Then I went home and edited it, and then I saw obviously the aftermath of what everyone was talking about as well. And
did your wife come in the evening? Did your wife come in and goes, "Well, you might be world famous, and you might have shot the death of Australia, but you got to put the bins out. Get back to
get back to
ground level." What's that?
That was pretty much my experienced during my whole time doing this kind of work is like, Rukshan, you got to do stuff at home as well. You can't just be shooting protests and doing live streams. You have to, help around the house as well and do all those things because,
Yeah.
that's a part of. Some days I got some relief, obviously, when I came back home after, I think, a protest in Richmond, and she was I had never, to be honest, guys, I'd never been experienced like being pepper sprayed or these. I'm not a confrontational type of person to find myself in those situations. So, coming home that day, for instance, and going into the shower, I didn't know what to expect.
The
Yeah,
shower.
I had no idea to have not.
I learned that lesson that day too.
Yeah, so I learned a lesson. So I'm in the shower, like I went to have a shower, and I'm screaming in the shower because when I started washing, all of the stuff is coming into my eyes and stuff, and I'm kind of crawled up into a ball in the shower, suffering. And my wife came, and I'm telling her to bring milk, and she's pouring milk over me in the shower. And she's been with me through these type of.
You should have live streamed that. That would have been
yeah. I mean, I regret not. I wish I live streamed more. I didn't really understand. I wish there was so many other things I could have live streamed during that time. I didn't really understand what it was, and if something like this ever happens again, I would document it even more because I think it's important to document those times.
Look, maybe you missed something, but you did some. But for anyone watching, Leon, what happens is you get it out of your face and you think, I just want to shower, but it's in your hair.
Yeah,
you should do a DIY for dummies. How to shower with pepper spray in your hair.
Yeah, and just imagine like the hottest chili you can get, and you just get a bath of it, and you jump in the bath because it just pours over you, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, everything.
Shave your head off before showering.
Well, we didn't know; they didn't tell us. So you just. I remember just screaming and laughing at the same time because it was so funny. But the other thing too, I want to say we are talking about White Australia while we're here. There was two things I really loved. One, the one that used to really make me smile when I saw you was you became so beloved and embraced by the people that initially when you were live streaming, people really didn't take much notice of you. They sort of, oh, hey, that's him, you're doing it. After this, you're walking through the crowd. It was like Jesus was trying to do live streaming. Because every second person's coming up, getting a selfie with you, going, I love you, Rukshan. So your whole lives going, I love you, Rukshan. I'm not putting you down, but I'm thinking this was beautiful. This man, simply by having the courage to film what was being seen, was validating these people's lives and the protests and the suffering they were going through. And to reciprocate, they adore you. And even now, I'm telling you, you're out around Australia, the people that know you or the people that watched, you're spoken with reverence. And I can tell you, I've been to every country numerous times. And you even just the other day, I've just had the people bring it up in Mildura, and they bring you up. And this is it's quite an extraordinary thing. Did you know, previous to COVID, when you're just doing your wedding photographs, and obviously you're brilliant at it, did you know that you literally we're en route to becoming a household name in a certain portion of Australia? Did anywhere in part of you go, I don't know what it is, but I've got a feeling that something big's coming?
No, nothing like that. And just to like touch on that thing, so obviously I'm kind of a purist when it comes to my work and doing my work without being disturbed. So at the start, it was very kind of difficult for me having people come up to me and like get in my shot. That's kind of as a wedding photography, like it's like when, the bride's walking down the aisle and some uncle comes in front with their phone and blocks your shot. It's kind of like that when people come to you and you're trying to do your work and film the live stream. And at the start, I'm not talking in like a bad manner about people, and I'm very grateful they actually came and spoke to me. But at the start, I was like, oh, this is kind of annoying because I just want to get what I'm here to do, which is capture the live stream. I don't necessarily want other people who are watching the live stream to just be watching me talking with other people. But I think at a certain point, I kind of understood, at least in that moment, for a lot of people that actually ended up coming to the protest later on, who had been watching at home, for them it was like a big thing in the sense of like, oh, this is the guy that I've been watching, and they just wanted to say thank you, and they were just being kind and generous.
That's correct.
And I just wanted to. I also then I started talking to people, and that in itself, if I got like, honestly, I didn't take any kind of donations. I didn't do anything like that for my work, and I shut all that kind of stuff down because I really didn't want to have that used against me when I was doing that work. But just to have people speaking to me and telling me how much it meant to them or how it kind of helped them through those times that they were going through, that really kind of gave me a lot of value for what I did. Like that was almost like the payment for what I was doing in terms of the gratitude that people were showing towards me. And as all the sacrifices that I'd made, I felt like that was worth it during that time, that I'd had this impact in helping people. And, I've had a few experiences, Michael. So obviously I continue to do weddings, and, especially the months after it kind of opened up again, I'd go at weddings and people would, come up to me at weddings. And I had multiple people just talking to me and start crying, just talking about what they went through. And, that's what I understood, that this had really at a fundamental level had really impacted people, not my work, but just what they'd been put through. And for them, that connection to, it wasn't necessarily my work, but it was the connection to other people that they saw on those streams, to let them know that they were not alone. That is a constant thing that I got from people when they spoke to me, that just for them seeing other people expressing what they were feeling, and even though they might not felt as comfortable going out there, and they might have not been able to muster up the same courage for whatever reason, and you can't blame people for it because obviously horrific things are happening if you watch the news. But seeing other people express themselves and being able to watch it was very important for people, I found out later on. And again, that shows you the power of just very simple, basic news reporting and live streaming, how that connects people and inspires people in a way to deal with their own issues. So in that sense, yes, talking to people and dealing with kind of their reaction to me for the work I did during that time. It's ongoing. I meet people all the time, different times, and they tell me these stories. It's good. It feels good. I'm not going to lie. Of course, there's a part of it where it makes you feel good to know that you've had this impact for certain people. So in that sense, it's good.
Even at the weddings, though, I mean, how many weddings have you been to where the wedding photographer is more famous than the bride? Did you have brides going, excuse me, it's my day?
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing, I do, sometimes I'm shooting photos on the street, obviously doing the bridal portraits and stuff on the street, the photo shoot. And there's people coming up to me to take a photo or something like this during that time. And it's always an interesting, fun story. Of course, there's also negative sides of it that are related to business. Not everyone obviously agreed with what I was doing. So, I did lose a lot of work.
Question,
I lost a lot of work. It changed my business a lot, all those things that happened. So there's negatives and positives to all things in life. And the main takeaway from me is with all of that is that, I can go to sleep very comfortably, wake up very comfortably, and live with myself for what happened during that time.
Well, that's my other question is, do you regret, if you had a chance to go back, would you have just stayed at home and wrote it out? But you just answered that. Yeah,
I don't think so. I don't regret any of that time. I mean, there's been it's hard to quantify the negatives of all of it. It's some of it you can't measure really, like to kind of understand how it impacts you to be in that kind of spotlight where you're kind of this, infamous, divisive figure as well, depending on how people see you. And obviously it's shaped my future career as well and my pursuits in journalism. And it's always going to stick with me, that time period, good or bad. And I just take it as it is. It's a wonderful for me, especially a learning experience as a journalist to kind of. It's like back in the day, you're doing like training on the street. It's like an apprenticeship almost. You're being put through the fire and you're being tested. And I know today that if I had to go do something like that again, or go to some other conflict zone or something like this, that I can stand up and do what needs to be done at that moment. I've kind of tested myself in that way, so I don't have regrets in that sense whatsoever. The only thing I might possibly regret is maybe not doing more. But again, that comes back to the fact that I didn't really understand, the impact of how much more impactful could I have been? How much more things could I have shown? How much more things, could I have done during that time that maybe might have changed things in a different way? You just like these kind of things go through your mind, and that's kind of the regrets that I have from that time.
I have some more questions, Leon. Do you? I don't want to hold him up. Do you have other questions, Leon, for yourself?
I'm glad that you gave me the floor, because I have to just say that I've got to love you and leave you guys. But always a pleasure to appear with you both, and thanks for coming on, Rukshan. I'm off.
Cheers, Leon.
Cheers.
See you, mate.
I just have a few more, Leon, because I've got a. I'm in this
you guys
town,
can keep
and
going.
our funeral director approached me, and they want me to interview their father. So I'll probably leave in about 10 minutes. I'll just take 10 minutes of Rukshan's time, because
Sure.
I've been wondering. I actually don't think we're journalists. I think we're thinking we're journalists because we are something fresh and something new, and I think there is, like I said, a renaissance happening all around the world. I interviewed people yesterday in Denmark and Sweden. I've got more interviews. I've got one with Finland coming up tomorrow, Ireland. Everywhere you go, it's exactly the same. Literally the same story. Different accents, same story. I haven't interviewed anyone from India or anything, which would be really interesting to do, to see what it was like there. But the story's the same. And I keep meeting people that are rising up. I call it like an army of light. Humans that are basically going, no, we're sort of heading into extra control and darkness. And people like yourself are basically surfing the wave of that, or especially what you're doing in COVID, and showing people basically this is what's happening. And I know that's supposed to be pure journalism, but in a way, I think you were searching for the truth yourself. Why is this happening? I'm out there searching for the truth for myself, and I'm letting you see what I see through my eyes, and people are following you. And I think this is different from journalists. You know what I mean? It's almost like explorers of the current human condition, because we are in an extraordinary time in history where 1 minute everything looks like everything's normal, but you just have to go a slight layer down and you realize, no, people are very disquiet. They're sure that things are going on. They don't understand what's going on. They're defaulting to silence. If you get them to speak, they can't shut up. And there's excess deaths everywhere. That's what this funeral director was just talking to me about. And there's all this, and I'm finding it out here too. Like, even I went to Broken Hill, which you thought would be the toughest of the toughest. The town's quiet, and people are very scared to speak, and they don't even know what they're scared of. And that's what I think you are. You look one of the that's what I think Rogan is. That's why people say he's not a real journalist. No, he's not a journalist. He's a conversationalist.
Yeah.
He calls out bullshit, and he's trying to discover the truth.
That's why he's so
And that's what I
successful.
think. And that's when I see you do your rants, Rukshan. They're brilliant, but at the same time too, you're pulling that's crap, but you don't have access to the real facts. So you're searching for it using the great intellect that you have. And so I think we're something new. And the MSN can't get their head around that, because we just had two 24-hour specials, but we just had another one, an international one, based on what we did. An international team did one. And for 24 hours, all these people spoke freely without any safety net, without any button in case someone said the wrong thing that they could stop us. It was tightrope walking freedom of speech. This is new. I've never experienced that in my lifetime.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
all
yeah.
searching for the truth. Do you think I'm bonkers, or do you think there's something there? Because I'm really interested, because I see you as basically very prominent in that. I know you've had a bit of time off, but that's what
Yeah.
you were,
Yeah, you're not bonkers. I mean, there's I'll just be honest about this whole journalism thing. So, we live in a society where there's these kind of definitions or classifications matter as a kind of even a legal protection sometimes. And I'm not saying I'm doing it for that particular purpose. That's not what I mean. But we live in that kind of world where we classify, who's who and what role they're serving and why they're at this particular spot. So a lot of it comes down to that. There's also aspects of it where, challenging traditional media, challenging these kind of self-described journalists that exist in corporate media. You want to challenge them as the alternative journalist, or the independent journalist, the citizen journalist. They hate it. They don't like it at all because they don't think you're valid whatsoever. They don't believe in the concept of citizen journalism or independent journalism. They're always laughing at it. You see Elon Musk today, he's the opposite of that. Of course, he's always saying you are the media. And that kind of touches on what you're talking about. And what that's about is, from the first time that humans, when we're born, after we're born, when we can speak, we get to know people by talking to them, conversing with them. So you talk. That's like how you get to know people. So the power of communication, talking, obviously with modern technology, it is as powerful as any type of journalism, if not more, because if you really want to engross yourself in what's happening in the world around you and the community around you, well, now you can spend hours upon hours, like you said, that 24-hour thing that you guys are doing, listening to people and hearing from them. And that, of course, helps you, shape your perspective on any given topic, whatever it might be. And that is really what freaks them out the most, is ordinary people, not even us doing what we're doing, just ordinary people communicating with each other without the filters that governments and authorities put over that. And that's why you see all these pushes for censorship. And, what do they say? They say, people can't decide for themselves what's true or not. They can't decide what's misinformation or disinformation. Well, that's never really mattered, has it? Throughout history, we've been in all types of, technology dark ages where people were speculating on many things that didn't really, maybe led to good outcomes, maybe led to bad outcomes, but overall the human race still advanced. And even today, it's the same thing. We can decide for ourselves after listening to information what we truly believe as individuals, what's good and bad. Of course, we do that within a basic set of, norms within the society that we all kind of adhere to, so we can have a polite society that's, not at each other's throats all the time. Like, those things are important. But at the end of it all, just people talking about issues and trying to figure out why they're feeling a certain way, or figure out why the government's doing something, or figure out, how they can improve themselves as a human being. That's not bad. That's good. And even if people make mistakes during that, and they might share wrong information and things, that's not bad either, because people will correct it in the future.
Yes.
The protections that they want to give people are obviously overblown. There are instances where people are scammed and, these kind of things happen, but you will notice on something like Facebook, for instance, they're not taking those things seriously. They're not worried about people being, defrauded and things. They're worried about people speaking and sharing communications, or at least they were.
Do you remember that Mel Gibson? There was a Mel Gibson post that was a scam. And I used to get it all the time. Yeah. And I thought, you're taking Rukshan down. You're taking me down in a second. Yeah. You can't take down this Mel Gibson thing, which just pops up constantly. I just want to say, too, to show you what we're doing, like, to me, this is the journalist now. If you're there, everything you need is here. Yeah. And now with CapCut and stuff like this, any person can put a news story together. Because we're watching the fires in LA now, and I think there's a huge portion of the population who are not watching Channel 9 to follow the fires. They're on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter following it, and what they're following is people who are actually there filming it. Yeah. And that's, I think you were literally one of the first ones that really captured that in this country, absolutely. Now live streaming is a word everybody knows, but I think when you started it, people were live streaming. What's that? I didn't know what it was. And so, it's an extraordinary moments in history. And
I mean, the phone is very impactful in technology-wise. It's really revolutionized things. There's a great documentary style film I believe it's called Writing with Fire. And it's in this kind of Indian village where you have these, lower caste women, and there's journalists that go there and they help these women set up this independent journalism type thing by giving them phones, just to report on what's happening in their community. and they train them on how to use the phones and how to kind of upload and do all these things, and that's it. Like technically from there you have this kind of news service, you have this connection that people all of a sudden have now.
Yeah.
And so it can't be discounted how important it is. It is revolutionary. It has obviously impacted change throughout the world, and sadly for a long time it felt like, it's a bit different now, but it felt like the West was determined to actually stop it from happening in the West, where all this comes from, where all these freedoms actually stem from. That's where they were afraid the most of people using that technology to share stories amongst themselves. I mean, it didn't really make sense why it was happening in the West so much, this type of censorship against their own people using the news. And then I kind of, obviously we know why. And that is because, of course, we can, with the systems of governments that we have in place, we can affect change when we do see these injustices or things which are happening in society which are wrong. We actually have the opportunity and the power, without using a revolutionary means, to challenge these people in authority and in power. And they hate that, because they've become so accustomed, so used to having control of the media, of the press, and getting things their way, getting the message out their way, that the moment that that's been taken away from them through social media and through the phone mediums, they hate it. And like you said, the LA fires, we might not have known about some of the issues around the water tanks and whatever. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, but we might have never known that if this happened 30 years ago.
Or the people lighting fires.
Yeah, it would have just been a fire. It would have just been whatever story they told us that happened. And that's you have to start thinking, like, throughout history, the stories that we've been told, what happened during that time, is it really 100%? Maybe it's correct to a certain degree, but is it really 100% accurate? Or was it the limitations of not having all that shared knowledge and experience from everyone else that was there through these kind of technological means, that they've been able to meld a version of the world that is more amicable to that particular ideology that they want to promote at that time.
History is written by the winners. I have to go, but one last question. Do you miss the adrenaline of those moments?
It's interesting, because I have done protests after that as well, and I've covered different types of...
I saw someone call you a Nazi.
Yeah.
He said you're placid. I saw your angry side there. I thought that's hilarious.
So I've done it, and it's kind of the same kind of, you're in the same environment, same thing. I think I've missed if I was to miss anything and to think back on it, just the unity that's there amongst the people that are there. It's very different when you do a protest, as you're seeing today, when you have groups who are going against each other, for instance, or it's a friction within a society against each other. Or there's a message of angst against one particular group in your community as well. It's very different covering something like that. Whereas where you're covering something where people are just uniformly against what's happening from the state or from the government, and their target is more so not their neighbor, but the actual government itself, it's different. And that's not just for right-wing kind of themes, it's for left-wing, whatever. I think that's the same kind of themes there when you're fighting a common kind of enemy at a thing, and it's just an institution or a government or something like this. There is a unity that exists at those protests, which is different to some of the, I guess, the more prominent type of protests that we're seeing today, where it's a bit more sectarian, beyond across ethnic lines or where you're from or what your views are, and it's against community. It's a bit different then.
It's interesting. I'm not from Australia. I was born in Wales. I don't know if you were born here or you came from Sri Lanka, but it's taken this period of time now for me to feel like an Australian, because I'm fighting for a country that I want to leave to my children, if my children have children, which I hope they do, that there is something left that they can be proud of. Do you still feel like you were saying before, you feel outed, or do you feel more Australian now, which you are? I mean, you're a friggin' broke here. I'm not underplaying that. Do you feel that now?
Yeah, it's been very interesting for me, Michael. Like, over probably the last few weeks, at least, I've questioned my identity a little bit more. Like, I'm very proudly Australian. I very openly speak up for issues in this country, and I very openly discuss, why it's important to protect the history of Australia. And I think people misunderstand some of that as well. So it has been challenging sometimes, like to have people tell you that, Rukshan, you'll never be Australian. You're not white. You should go back. You should be ashamed to be here. It doesn't matter how much you love this country and how much you say these things. You're never going to be one of us. Like that. If you look at my comments, and when I'm, especially even in comments, videos where I'm discussing, protecting Australia and my patriotism and things like this, that's the common attack that I get. And I mean, I'm not affected by it to the extent of it changing my relationship with this country, but it opens up my eyes to the fact that perhaps people who are not so patriotic or love Australia as much as I do, that would really impact them in the reverse direction. And, essentially, I see them as dangerous people in the sense of not as evil intentioned, but they're going away from, being a part of Australia. And I don't want that.
This is what we're battling now. See,
yeah, that's what we're battling.
I think I might have. I actually got one of Avi's trolls. PR guy got on my case briefly. I thought, oh my god, I must be moving up in the world. I'm getting the kings, the dukes trolls.
Yes.
But one way to think of them, Rukshan, is I get inspired by their hate because I think I can't leave the moral high ground of this country in your hands, because all you have to offer is hate. And any way they can hurt you, they will. They attack me and Avi and Leon in any way they can. So when they say things to you like this, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't even mean it. What they do is anything that will hurt.
Yeah.
Anything that they can.
I mean, the trolls and stuff like this, I don't care about. But I think it's becoming a moderate position for some people because they're not able to distinguish exactly the issues that we face in society, and it's easy to target certain individuals in those instances. So that's the issue here, where an extreme position like that. And I know we don't have a lot of time for this, but an extreme position like that.
No, this is actually another conversation, because
becomes a moderate position, and that's when you're into dangerous territory, because the reality is the makeup of the country is actually set in such a way where you can alienate so many people against your actual good intentions, and it actually works against you. So I'm going to keep fighting for Australia. To answer your original question, I'm going to keep doing what I do, because I truly believe, like you said, for future generations, I want my children, great grandchildren, whatever, to grow up in relatively, as best as possible, the identity and the culture and the things that make Australia and the West, by extension, great. And the only way you're going to do that is by preserving it. And you can only fight within the circumstances you are a part of now. You can't look back to history. I can't look back to the history of pre-colonized Sri Lanka and say, hey, it would have been great if the British didn't come. I have to accept the history of what happened to our people and live with that and move forward.
I'm from Wales, man. The English have been fucking us since I can't remember when.
You're from Wales, right? So you take the good and the bad of that history and you move forward. And that's kind of how you got to approach it. And a lot of people are getting caught up in things which don't really, at the end of the day, it's not going to work out the way that they're thinking it's going to work out for them. And it's actually going to work in the negative. And in the negative is actually where the dominance is when it comes to these power bases within politics. And this identity politics, this racial division, they feed off this. And this is what you got to fight against to protect identity. So that is what I'm doing.
This would be a great conversation. I think this is a separate conversation.
Yes.
Because, like, my ancestry, my father's 100% Welsh. My sister did his DNA. I didn't think anyone was 100% anything. But there's no people of colour in my past that I know of, because we came from Wales, where that was just how it was. And so I refuse not to be proud of my heritage, because these people went through all manner of suffering, of which I am the current, and my son is the current holder of that, writer of our combined novel. And I think in this country, we should be able to be proud of where we've come from, and yet at the same time have a second pride of who we are. When I was a tram driver, before I managed to crack the theatre and make a living, I was writing poetry about the trams, and I wrote this poem that called Victoria Street that the ABC radio wanted me to read out. And it was just basically saying the world was in my tram and there was no hate. There was Muslim people helping Jewish people, women on with prams. Everyone was standing up. There was every color there. And there was people were just looking at their phones. They were just trying to get to work. They didn't realize the hope they were displaying simply by the fact that they were all getting on from everywhere. That Australia is a melting pot of people who want to come and build new lives, and it has the capacity. And the French company that took the trams were going to sack me for having the audacity to write about the people. And so the corporation said, if you go on that radio station, we'll sack you. I said, okay, go ahead. You know, and eventually they backed down, but the people were beautiful, and that's where it is. Melbourne was actually seen as the greatest multicultural city in the world. They were having, just before COVID, they were having people coming over to figure out how did Melbourne do it. We didn't have these ghettos and so much, so there was always problems, but we did it better than other countries. And I think history repeats. But they always use that term with history repeats to mean bad shit. But I think, well, why can't we do good stuff? And we've got this great city. We're a great people. We had one man come and he was guarded by a police force who seemed to have forgotten that they were there to protect us. And we've been through this traumatic period. But the best way to get out of this is to talk about it, is to explore it like a plane crash. What happened? How do we fix it?
Of course.
How do we stop it so our children never have to face it? And how do we reestablish a new identity for ourselves of who we are? And what we are is like a quilt. It's basically the Sri Lankans, Africans, English, Welsh, Slovakians, Yugoslavians, everything. We're all here. The world's all here. And previous to COVID, we were working as a quilt. So we still have the ability to do that and be something of great light and hope and worth to share with the world, rather than this quiet, silent people we are now. Anyway, look, I rant on. I'm an old man. I'll go forever. I just want to say, though, it's an honor to talk to you. I did do you once before. We had a joke thing where we introduced you as the leader. And then we got Jerry on. We said we get him on. Then Jerry came on. But that was a really funny show. That. Yeah, it was a great show. But I really want to commend you and just let you know, on behalf of the people I interview, that you are truly beloved. Your courage has spread across the country, and you will be forever remembered for it. And that's because you decided, I'm just going to hold my camera straight. I'm going to film what I'm seeing. And I do believe you were filming an absolute attack on who we were by our own people, who were basically so filled with fear, they didn't know what they were doing. And I think that's what you captured.
Thank you, Michael. It's been lovely to speak to yourself and Kofy today. And thank you for the work that Cafe Lockdown is doing. And I think it's very important work, and definitely this is the future is, like we've discussed, is in these type of things that we're doing. So it's very important. Yeah. So thank you so much. And I'd love to come back on, talk about other issues and stuff as well. Which,
I think it'd be great. That'd be a great thing. So, and say hi to Avi too. Avi's astounding what he does.
I'll let him know.
Yeah, but this is a great conversation to have. How do we? Because I see people talking hate of Jews, hate of this. This is how they destroy us. Yes. Love is the only way we can fix it.
I believe so, yeah, definitely.
Take care, brother. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
But wait. Can you hear our children crying? They're calling from all over this land. They're glaring at today's page.